and I'll do a presentation, I'll have worked for hours and hours, and it can fall on silence, I guess, tumbleweeds. And that makes me think, oh, well, it couldn't have been very good then. I've completely underwhelmed everyone into a coma. And then fill in the blanks. I mustn't be very good at this. That must have been boring. What did I do wrong?
Hello, my beautiful friends. My name is Dr. Beck.
And I am Christine Barker, and this is Am I Doing It Wrong? A podcast for doctors by doctors. Dr. Beck is a mindset coach and medical doctor who specialises in liberating driven, professional women from the limitations of perfectionism, imposter syndrome, and people pleasing. She's basically the cheat code for getting out of your own way, showing up authentically, and living a life you're proud of.
And Christine is a medical educator and nephrologist who creates resources for doctors in training that I truly think are an unfair advantage. She makes complex topics super simple and takes the pain and uncertainty out of passing your medical exams. Christine and I connected a few years ago via our online platforms, and over the years we've discussed countless highs, lows, and in-betweens of doctor life. And in doing so, we've experienced firsthand the power of vulnerable conversations to show us where we're getting in our own way and underestimating our capacity.
So we want you to be part of the conversation and experience these same results. Every week on the pod, we'll be bringing you conversations which shine light in dark places, normalise the doctor journey, ease unnecessary suffering, and give you actionable steps to thrive in all facets of your life. So grab a cuppa and get cozy for this week's episode of Am I Doing It Wrong? The podcast for doctors by doctors.
Hello, my beautiful friends, and welcome back to our channel and another episode of our podcast, Am I Doing It Wrong?
This is going to be a juicy one. So today what we're talking about is when the absence of expected feedback causes us to spiral and catastrophize and tell ourselves a wee story in the absence of that feedback and what that means. So Beck, you had a great example of this. I'd love to hear your recent story.
Let me just paint this picture for you. So I'm getting dressed. We've got plans to go out tonight, and I put on a new shirt or something, done my hair, my makeup. I'm like, you look pretty nice. You scrub up okay. My partner's gonna like this. So I walk out and say to my partner, I'm ready. And in this space right here, where I've given all this attention to getting myself ready, and I'm like, good job, you've done a good job here. This is the space where I expect there to be a compliment. This is the lack of expected positive feedback space. So that space in itself then gets filled with my mind's work, and it says, oh, he doesn't care about how I look. Oh, he doesn't think I look nice. Oh, maybe I'm not attractive. Oh, maybe I'm not worthy. Spiral. So this is just one example of how when we have these expectations in our lives of how we expect others to react to us, usually with, just verbal positive feedback. When there's a gap, when that expectation isn't filled, our minds will go ahead and involuntarily fill that space for us. And as much as I'm sure this situation I've just described is probably quite relatable to most of you, this is an important situation that also happens in medical culture. It's something that occurs a lot in the hospital culture, which is not particularly highly structured or having the social norms of there being a lot of positive feedback or any feedback in a lot of cases. So we thought this would be a great topic for us to touch on today. I see you giggling along there with me, Christine.
I don't know what's worse, because I can totally relate to this in my personal life as well. I can totally relate to that feeling where I'm like, look at all this energy I've put into myself. I am a goddess and you really need to notice right now, and you are not noticing at all. That's very underwhelming. He's just living his best life, completely oblivious. Like, yes, can totally relate to that. I think there were so many people listening who can relate to that. But yeah, at work and things, I think the most common thing that happens to me, or where this comes up the most, is when you're doing a presentation at work. Have any of you ever done a presentation where you have put your wee heart and soul into it? And let's face it, that's what I do all the time. I present things. I'm an educator, right? And I'm thinking, well, this is who I am. This is like this is my jam, right? This is what I'm supposed to be good at. And I'll do a presentation. I'll have worked for hours and hours, and it can fall on silence, I guess, tumbleweeds. And that makes me think, oh, well, it couldn't have been very good then. I've completely underwhelmed everyone into a coma. So, and then fill in the blanks. I mustn't be very good at this. That must have been boring. What did I do wrong? But then I feel like I don't really want to ask them for feedback either, because I've already made up my mind that I can't deal with that today. And it's such an interesting thing. And I think I'd love to pick this apart with you, because it is something that comes up a lot, whether it's at home or whether it's at work, is this absence of feedback. If you're not getting any feedback at all for something that you've just poured your wee heart into, be it your appearance or something like that at work, and no one says anything, it's not even that they said anything bad, there's just a nothingness, and then that nothingness needs to be filled somehow. And so why do we do that? Why do we do that? And why is it always a negative story? You know, are there people out there who put a positive story in there? Maybe you do. When you're being deliberate, like, but it's always negative for me. It's always worst case scenario. So what are we doing? Why are we doing that?
Why are we doing it? It is always a negative story for me too, don't you worry. Because I guess the situation we set up here is that you're expecting positive feedback. That is it's your baseline expectation. You're making this equivalency of saying, if I did a good job, or if I fulfilled the requirement, if I was up to par, if I whatever the standard is, then this is the response I would get. And therefore, when you get something that's less than the response, it also means you haven't met that criteria. So, or you haven't met that standard or performance, whatever you wanted. So I think we really set ourselves up here with this false equivalency of saying that good performance or good outcome would be reflected by this good feedback. So that's our first sort of fatal flaw there that kicks off this this vicious cycle. But, you know, as you've said, it is broken down into multiple phases. There's multiple points along the way where you can intervene on this process such that you don't end up in the full spiral of maybe I'm not good enough and I don't even want to go and ask for feedback now at this point, right? So if you just can take away from this episode the possibility or the idea, or inquire within yourself, am I holding one of those expectations of what would show me that I've done a good job? Am I expecting positive feedback here? You're going to be so much further ahead and able to intervene on this process and not go down that spiral. Because that in itself, the idea that, I'll just use the example with my partner again. The idea that, if one of those equivalencies I make, say, he doesn't care about, or he doesn't think I look nice. So I expected that he would give me a compliment on how I looked if he thought I looked nice. So then when he didn't give me that compliment, I then made that mean he doesn't think I look nice. Now that in itself, hopefully you guys can see, they're not a true association. That's not a true equivalency there. And this is probably the case for my partner in all cases. I'm here making it mean that he doesn't care about me in some way. But actually, the fact that he didn't have a compliment, it doesn't mean at all that he doesn't think I look nice. It doesn't even necessarily have anything to say about, I can hear people saying, well, he just doesn't pay enough attention to you. Well, he should pay more attention to you, or something. But this person is a whole human in themselves. They've got their own stuff going on. It's not his job to be looking at me and judging how I look 100% of the time. And I wouldn't want him to, right? So we've got to be really careful with these expectations that we set up in terms of the feedback and what it means if we do or don't get the feedback. And I think this is so important for us in the hospital because we have been primed as people who've been successful in the academic system to the point that they could get into med school, get through training programs, and all of the gold stars you need along the way to do that. You're constantly getting validated, not by like, beautiful, elaborate compliments or anything like that, but by like, yeah, you got that pass mark, you got through that interview, you got whatever. You're constantly getting validation. But when you're out there just doing your clinical practice, there's not much validation to be found in that clinical practice world. I don't know, you could tell me more about your experience with how much validating feedback you get in your pure clinical practice.
Oh, there's very little. And I think it comes mainly from the patients. I think, yeah, there's very little validation at all coming from, and even then when you're really busy, sometimes you don't even get the validation from the patients, or if it's there, you're blind to it in some way. But just as you were talking there, I thought of this sort of, because what you were saying was when you're having that expectation of positive feedback, you've set up an expectation. And then I was thinking, well, is it better to have no expectations? But I've definitely set up scenarios in the past where I actually made this worse. So for example, that thing about how you look, I remember when I first started seeing my partner, because I'm in my late 30s, I'm thinking I want to future proof this. Like, I don't want to like be judged, and I'm going to get older. So I set up this preface that I'm like, if you're going to compliment me, can you compliment something about my non-physical appearance? Could you compliment me on like something else, right? And I tried to this was really early. This is like honeymoon phase. I'm trying to set this narrative, right? So the poor guy just cannot win. But the reason that I was doing that was because I was scared that he would give me lots of attention right now about my physical appearance, and then as I got older, he would dwindle and I would make that mean something. So I almost tried to control like what he was allowed to compliment me on, or what he was allowed to say, and so it wasn't very healthy, I don't think, in that sort of sense. So I don't think it protected me from that, because the same thing would still happen, is I would emerge from having put a bit of energy into my appearance, and he would not acknowledge it, and it's like, well, this is what you asked for, but for some reason I'm still wanting to be acknowledged. So could you speak to that, Beck? I mean, this is getting very sort of like into my inner world here, but could you talk about that? I don't really know how that applies to the medical meeting. I'll have to go much deeper, I think. But in terms of what you, like, I guess what's reasonable should you have no expectations? Should you have no expectations of this person? Should you set up something like that, like a narrative that you'd like to have? Or is that in and itself toxic? Because I think I've created it to be a toxic problem.
Oh no, I think that's so relatable as well. And I think it's quite insightful that you've been like, you're projecting ahead and you're like, this is something that could, because relationships are patterns, we learn how to treat each other. And so you've been insightful enough to be like, I want to set this up from the start to be like patterns that really are supportive and useful to me. However, when, there's a couple of things here that I'm really interested in. One is what you already said yourself, which is that you were doing it because you were protecting yourself from your own thoughts about you. It wasn't really about him. It was about, you're like, if this situation occurs in the future and he doesn't give me compliments, I know in this specific way, I know I'm at risk of thinking bad things about myself. And this is a more common pattern than we know in our lives. For example, I won't take an opportunity in my life because I know about myself that if I fail at that opportunity, I'm going to make that mean I'm a failure. I was never good enough in the first place. I should just stop everything. That's a very common thought pattern that people have, and they don't realize that they're only trying to protect themselves from themselves. The failure itself, not necessarily that bad or devastating or debilitating, but we know what we're going to make that failure mean about ourselves, and that is terrifying. That's intolerable. We can't take that. So we're actually trying to protect ourselves from ourselves. So that would be, in that situation, that's the kind of stuff that we'd look into. We'd say, when we make requests and set boundaries with other people, which includes, how they speak to us and what we want them to, pay attention to there, and like how we're loved and how we're appreciated. This very much applies in our clinical work as well. It's important as clinicians that we feel valued. This is a part of the burnout problem. Clinicians don't feel valued in the work they do. And that, when you're doing something you love and something that's really important, you could do it all day long for the most part. We've all got examples of that in our lives. When we have something we're really passionate about and we know is improving the world, we can do it all day long. But when you take away the sense of value in the work, it becomes pointless and it's exhausting to do it, totally draining. So when we're making these requests and setting these boundaries, we want to understand where they're coming from. And if it's coming from a place where we're just protecting ourselves from our own thoughts, I would much rather we clean up the part where we're being mean to ourselves and we're not having our own back. I'd rather clean that up first before working out what we want from this other person. But it's of course not, like, that sounds beautiful and simple and easy when I say it, but it is this like pulling things out kind of discovery process. And that leads into your next question of like, do we just not set expectations? Do we just not have expectations? And the answer for me is a very strong no, because I think, when it comes to this stuff that's important to us in life, whether it's professional relationships or personal relationships, your expectations are a proxy for the standards that you have, the situations that you decide you're going to be in and that you decide you want to be in. And if you don't have any expectations, you don't have any standards, you can let yourself be like pushed around and moved around by culture, or stay in relationships that, might be fine for all intensive purposes, but they're not, the relationship that would most make you thrive. It's not the workplace that you can do your best work in, for example. So this is where I would say, this is where we have to do that terribly hard work for a lot of us as people pleasers, as perfectionists, as people who are just great at doing the right thing all our lives, which is to ask for what we want. And so you've already done this with your partner here. You've had the courage to ask what you want, which is the hardest thing for most people. But maybe if we explore this a bit more, what you really want in this scenario might be different from what you thought, and that's very normal. I get what I want wrong, me personally. It takes me a few iterations to work out what I really want, because it's not until you kind of integrate it or until you sort of see the scenario all the way through, you're like, I was aiming for this, but this is what I actually wanted. And I just didn't know that until I opened the next door and the next door sort of thing.
Yeah, and that's all becoming clear to me at the moment. Like, I think what I really want is for that to be true, that it doesn't matter what I look like to him. But I guess, yeah, that's obviously what I want. But yeah, I'm this sort of maladaptive thing. But it is interesting. Like, the more I think about it and the more I'm listening to you talk about it, I think if I'm honest, I probably have closed off my expectations at work in the clinical realm, and also I haven't gone as far as to tell people how to I think my expectations must be quite low. I really haven't ever thought about setting an expectation as standard, other than perhaps if there's someone who's maybe it's not like the absence of feedback, but there's some people that at work, can be challenging, and so you almost like avoid them or something like that. But it's avoidance. I have not gone into the realms of having difficult discussions at work and things. It's more sort of just get like in and boundary. Get out. Silent boundary is such a good way to put it. Yeah. But it's such an interesting concept of having expectations gives us the standard that we're aiming for. So what would you suggest for me in that moment when I've done the thing and I'm at work and I'm having crickets and I'm questioning the meaning of life, because all I ever do is try to make wonderful presentations, and I'm there and I just can't. I'm in this I'm so upset. inside. And yeah, the meeting's about to close, and I don't ask anyone for feedback because I'm now no longer interested in your feedback, and I'm now in a bit of a, I need to go for a walk and have a biscuit. Like, what would you do with me in that moment when it's more of a work scenario? What do you think I should do?
Yeah, and that brings up such a good point, because we talked about making requests and setting boundaries. And well, let's just look at making requests. Requests are really, they're an investment of your time and energy as you sort of give and share this information with other people about what your standard is and how you would like to be treated. And those other people can take it or leave it. And you'll find out if they value the relationship, if they value you in this relationship too, by how they respond to that. It's not black and white. It's not like, well, if they didn't meet all of my list of expectations and standards, then they clearly don't value me. But it's just information to take in. So making requests, you might decide to do when you've got a longer term relationship or a really important relationship, and you're willing to make that investment and you want to learn more about each other in that way. For example, with your workplace, where you do most of any of your clinical work, you're going to be with them for a long time probably. So you probably, it's probably worth making those requests and looking into what's worth that investment for you. But when it comes to, you've given us this example of, you've got this audience that, perhaps is a once-off audience or a mix of different people, and they respond in the way they naturally want to respond in that moment. There's an option there to make a request, or there's an option there to not. Making a request in that situation probably isn't going to be, what that would look like is obviously not like an explicit request, but you could go sort of looking and asking for their feedback actively, because you're genuinely curious. Like, is there something I missed? Is there something you want me to add? Is there a gap here? That's making a request of them. You're requesting their feedback, and then you can move forwards with what deciding what that feedback means. Excuse me. However, in this scenario where they're not a long-term relationship, this is the time where you usually would want to get really interested in those thoughts. And you've already had the awareness to see that a lot of those thoughts are really painful for you, and they're probably coming with a lot of associated painful, difficult emotions. And this is where we do our coaching work together. We inquire about what's happening with us, and it's this mixture between taking care of ourselves in a difficult situation, because as much as you want to berate yourself, like, that's the instant reaction, like, don't be silly, don't make it mean it was terrible, don't be dramatic, blah blah, like, that's our initial reaction. And that judgment is not useful. It's natural, but it's not useful. And so not only have you got the initial sort of pain of like, my expectations weren't met, but now you've got the judgment on top. You've got, for a lot of us, me included, I would have to take care of myself in that emotional state at that time. I'm not talking about necessarily days or weeks, but I'm talking about, you need a few minutes. You might need hours, you might need days, but that needs to be acknowledged. So also that cycle can be stopped of the judgment and so on. And then, or maybe simultaneously, after caring for the emotions, you've also got all those thoughts and all the potential thought errors in there to deal with that we talked about at the start, with the false equivalencies of what we're making things mean. So that's probably a lot of journaling that you could do in that time. And it is a time where you probably don't want to look at your thoughts. So again, emphasizing the emotional aspect of that. But yes, I'm very empathetic to this scenario. It feels very familiar and close to home. And I'm sure I've got many of these scenarios coming up in the future, actually, as I think about it.
Yeah, it is. But I can see how there is like a self-protective mechanism, and even the fear of understanding what's underneath it. I guess, like, if I was to go and explore that, I guess my worry would be that it really wasn't very good or whatever. And I guess who measures that? Because you can say, oh, you can validate yourself, but when you're giving a presentation to a group of people, it is actually about their experience. Like giving the audience an experience is my whole goal. And if they're like blank and underwhelmed, but I think it's depends on who you, like I'm talking about a work meeting, people are in the middle of their day, they don't want to be at another meeting. Like there's so much going on, like you said about, Dan, he's just living his best life. He's got a lot of things going on. All of these people have a lot going on. It doesn't need to be personal. But then I guess I would be worried that if I start to go in there and ask for feedback, that they would that again I would be met with silence because they have no feedback to give, and having no feedback or whatever is still just as bad, because then it's this vicious cycle. So I think it's so interesting. But yeah, you're right. I think I'd probably it makes me want to avoid doing it again, but I can't not do this again. Like I would just love to never do that meeting. I think I said this in one of the recent podcasts, this meeting in me, it's challenging. But I find that it would make me engage in avoidant behaviors if it wasn't my ultimate responsibility to fulfill that meeting. And sometimes it's great. Like, so for example, yesterday in the meeting, I decided to just stay in my lane and I actually recorded a podcast, like some content in my work meeting. And that was great, because I was almost like, well, and I wasn't worried about their feedback, because I was thinking this is going to be amazing for my other audience. Do you know what I mean? As opposed to my work audience. But then what happened was I got loads of feedback that it was so great and it was resonating. And like, do you know what I mean? So I think sometimes when you're not looking for it, you actually find it as well. What would you say to that? Like when you don't have the expectation, or you've let go, maybe it's letting go of the expectation is what happened there. And it actually ended up being an overall better experience. What would you say about letting go?
I think when I think about the effect of letting go, and that kind of, I just instantly think that you're relaxing into yourself, and it makes me think about how, again, like when we're afraid of ourselves, when we're afraid of what we're going to make things mean, if we have that expectation and we know that if we don't get that positive feedback, we're going to make it mean something bad, that makes you afraid and that makes you tense up, and we don't tend to perform well when we're in that state, do we? So I think you've touched on something really important there, that we need to be really careful as to how we hold these expectations, and they're not often obvious. I think you need to go looking for these, and you probably only first notice them if you get that like oomph, that harsh, that pain after you notice there is a lack of positive feedback where you are expecting it to be there, right? You don't often notice it beforehand unless you do the work to really inquire. You said something else that was really important, and probably the key to this, which is how we make it personal. The example with my partner, it has nothing to do with him. This is all about me and my thoughts. The example of the audience is really difficult here, because as you're saying, your goal is to actually give value to them, and they kind of measure value. And actually I can apply this in this scenario with my partner too, because I'm like, my goal is to please him in some ways and be pleasing to him. It's obviously not my whole identity, but like there are parts of me in a relationship where you want to please the other. And so that's a really hard position to be in. You're actively disempowering yourself. You're actively saying these other people hold the power to say whether this was valuable or not. That's really tough, but we actually do it on purpose because we do care about other people. In this case, with these presentations, you actually want to give value to them. You don't want to give value solely based on what you think is valuable. Your goal is to add value to their lives, and it puts us in a very difficult position. And again, that's why this work, this really looking into your mind is so important, because you're actively striving towards that, and you want to let go of that control, and you want to let them have their opinions. You want to know their opinions. You want to know if they have no feedback. But you'll be afraid to look at that if you take it personally, if you make it mean something about you and your abilities in the future. So I probably just underscoring there how challenging this is. It's not all about validating ourselves, but when we're trying to, create value for other people, we just need to be really careful that that is our goal, and we don't turn it around on ourselves and make it mean something personal or terrible about ourselves when we don't please every single person or any person sometimes.
Yes, and I've just had an aha moment because I said letting go a second ago thinking I knew what it meant, but until you started talking, I feel like you just defined letting go means that you are detaching from it being personal. I feel, is that right? I feel like that just clicked for me. Oh, it's like a superpower. I love it when you do this. You thought wizard, you. This is so fun. Letting go is detaching from making it personal.
I feel like you pulled that out of what I said and you made that brilliant. So thank you. Yeah, how free does that make you feel if it's not personal? That's
right. But it's just an action step, because being let go, it's like, what does that mean, Christine? But stop making it personal. I can hold that.
Clean up all those thoughts. Yeah.
So what do you think would be, out of everything we've said, which it just is blowing my mind still, what would be the key take home messages, do you think, for everyone who's listening?
So I think be aware that you're in an environment, be aware of the environments that you're in, whether it be personal or professional, where you don't get, it's where it's not a culture of constant positive feedback, or at least the level of positive feedback that you would ideally like. In an ideal world, if we could wave a magic wand, you'd say, well, I'd get some positive reinforcement, twice a day. That'd be awesome. Be aware if you're in an environment that's not sort of hitting those thresholds for you. Because then in those cases, we want you to get interested in the times where you are expecting positive feedback, and that lack of positive feedback, hey latte, and that lack of positive feedback gets made to mean that something's going wrong, and in particular when you take that personally. Finally, you can't always be ahead of your mind like this. Your mind will often surprise you with its involuntary thoughts about what that lack of positive feedback means. So when you find yourself in a situation where you didn't get the feedback, and then you therefore go and make it mean something personal about yourself and your future, i.e. you're being perfectionistic, this is a red flag to take care of yourself in this moment. You got to take care of yourself to be able to go and explore all those thoughts, because that's a painful situation to be in. Anything else to add?
I love that so much. And it's so great to have actionable strategies, but also giving yourself permission to not catch yourself before it happens. But I think everyone who's listening with those examples, especially the getting ready for date night, I feel like everyone will be like on red alert for their date night experience and their next work presentation. But you might not care as much as I do about that. But yeah, date night has now got a new game to play, isn't it?
I was telling Christine how this is definitely not about my partner, because I'll go to the hairdresser and I will say, the same as normal, please, kind of the same as normal. Exactly the same, change nothing. And then I'll come home with my hair done from the hairdresser and I'll be like, hey, no feedback, no compliment. But I asked for it to be exactly the same. The poor guy, what chance has he got?
What chance has he got? Yeah, I mean, I've also had the experience where I've had like a proper chop, and I've had that same experience. It is funny, isn't it? But ultimately, like, I feel like the healthiest thing is to do those things for yourself. But I fully agree. Like, part of being in a relationship is thinking about your impact on the other person. And these things do matter on some level. And so it's just beautiful to have that kind of top of mind, so you can just really see it. It's not right or wrong, but it's just it's got the potential to torture you, so it's good just to know about it and then to work through those strategies that you said, and I think I'll be a lot less likely to protect myself moving forward. I'll be a lot more cognizant of that. So thank you so much, Beck. This has been pure gold for me. I got so much out of this. I don't know about you guys listening, but I got so much out of just this conversation. So thank you.
I did too. Thank you so much. And guys, let us know down below. Is this relatable to you? Do you have suspicion that you have some expectations that when not met can create a lot of pain for you, and just like in your day-to-day life as well. It doesn't have to be a big amazing fancy presentation like Christine does, but these moments that happen throughout your day as well, this does have a lot of potential to cause a lot of pain. Let us know. We are so happy to have you guys here listening, and thank you for all of your interaction. We always appreciate it.
I've been waiting all my life for something. I've been down the darkest roads and up in the clouds, but I've always felt that something's missing.